Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Data Standard Audio Experience. Today we have Daniel Peck, the Director of Data Platform Engineering at PepsiCo. And today we're going to be speaking more about the similarities and differences between data engineering and software engineering. So welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thank you, Catherine. Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me on. Really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, can you tell the audience more about your background and just introduce yourself?
Yeah, sounds good. So, like you said, I'm director of data platform engineering for PepsiCo, working in the e-commerce group there. Most of my early career was actually based around cybersecurity. Spent a lot of my teenage years and early career focus in that area. At the very start, spending some time developing detection and prevention systems for big clients like banks and utility companies, and from there moved on to doing a little bit more offensive focused work in the industrial control system world. It's been a few years there, going out to black start sites in Texas and some hydro facilities up in the Northeast and other places around the country, trying my best to break their systems. So having a lot of fun there. It's a great job for a 28-year-old who thought he knew everything. Most recently, before coming to PepsiCo, I was CTO of a mesh Wi-Fi startup called Luma, based here in Atlanta. We did that for a few years. I was the CTO of it and led the engineering and product teams before we were acquired. Then after that, I did consulting for a little bit. I was head of technology for a hip hop festival for a little while. That was fun, and took the current role at PepsiCo last year. Here, my teams are mostly doing data engineering work, like we'll talk about some today, building pipelines, and largely responsible for all the data revolving around anything that gets sold as far as the PepsiCo product inside of a web browser or an app. So quite a bit of fun there the last couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. And you have a lot of experience in software engineering and also data engineering, and these fields are very similar, but there's also aspects of it that are different. So let's dive into it. Can you tell us more about the similarities and differences of the two?
Yeah, I'd say it's probably showing some of my old Lisp leanings here to think about it, but I've always thought a lot about the code is data, data is code way of thinking, and that certainly influenced the way that I look at data engineering and software engineering generally. I tend to think that they're more similar than they are different. I think a lot of times that as an industry, we tend to rush towards drawing a distinction between things that don't necessarily need one, at least early on. For instance, my team at PepsiCo, a large amount of them spend a lot of their time creating client libraries to connect to various APIs for our retailer systems that pull information about sales and share and stock levels, things like that are then run through our Airflow platform. And if you really look at that, and then of course staging the data in the databases and doing modeling and things like that on top of it. But if you look at that, that's not too terribly different than what a lot of back engineering does. It's you're making libraries to connect to APIs and be able to pull data and stage it up for use later, whether that's in a business process or whether it's on a social network. A lot of the building blocks of it are very similar.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. And why do you think that it's important that we kind of bring these two worlds together for data engineering and software engineering, since you're saying that they're pretty similar?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think a lot of the reason that I think they should be combined, or at least thought of as incredibly similar, is a lot of because the people building it. I think it's good for them. The reality is a lot of what we do in the software world and really the tech world in general tends to be very fad driven, right? Or hype driven, or sometimes the joke about resume driven development, because you always want to have the new hot thing on your resume to be able to talk about it. And that's fine. As a profession, we're still fairly young. We're really good at adopting new things. We're also really good at kind of forgetting our roots and reinventing the wheel, even if our roots were, only 5-10 years ago, which is, all things considered, a pretty short period of time when you're talking about professional things. So, whether it's a language or a framework, we do like to move to things that are new and interesting. And that effect tends to be magnified a lot with these new areas where we say something is data engineering versus software engineering. But, all things considered, I'm a much bigger fan of breaking down walls than building them. So, basing these things on really proven processes and extending that when it's needed, and really look at adopting new technology and new terminology and things like that only when they're able to really make a significant difference and really move that needle, by a long way. Because there's a lot of cost in those kind of changes and adopting new workflows and and having people who approach things differently is great, but it can cause a lot of trouble in your processes if you're not cognizant of it and are aware of the larger changes that it needs to make to really make those costs worthwhile. And generally, I'm always a fan of generalization. And I realize I just said general 2 times in a sentence there, but we're going to keep it because I like that. But there's the old Heinlein quote about, human beings should be able to like change a diaper, design a building, write a sonnet, and cook a meal, and a lot of other stuff in that line. But I think there's just tremendous value for the individual doing the work and being able to generalize those skills and those skill sets and keep themselves portable. There's space for specialists, but especially in, early career, I think that people should be very aware and think very hard about it before specializing too much. A lot can change a lot in just a few years in the software kind of space and data engineering space as well. It's, changed dramatically in the last 5 years and will probably change pretty dramatically in the next 5 as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that I always talk about with my past guests is that especially in this data-driven industry, things are always changing in the technology field. How do you and your team kind of stay up to date with the things that are always changing in technology? What is the best practice for that?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know if there's any like one really clear answer. I'll tell you what we tend to do as my teams is we tend to share a lot of articles and different things that are going on around the team. I try to make it a point of, start of the week, Monday, Tuesday, of throwing out something that I found interesting from the previous week, and some other team members do the same thing. And it really just kind of keeps everybody a little fresh, whether it's, an article of somebody talking about their experience with building a certain thing, or a new library that might be useful for us to bring into our modeling, or, products that are being delivered and pitched. And it's like, hey, there's an interesting white paper here. Maybe we should look at using XYZ in our next product, or do a proof of concept about it, things like that. And it keeps everybody kind of fresh. It leads to a lot of that cross-pollination between things because, everybody has a little bit different interest. And as they're bringing things forward, get to see a little something different. And this goes all the way down to things like programming languages. Around Pepsi, we have a lot of Python and a lot of Elixir, and some folks do both. Some folks only do one, and seeing things kind of go back and forth between them. And, oh, well, that's really neat that's happening in that ecosystem. Or, oh, this is like something that happened over in Python, or this is the different way to apply actor model kind of stuff. That's really interesting and keeps everybody kind of fresh.
Yeah, definitely. And I always hear a lot of companies saying they're trying to hire younger people also just to be able to balance out the younger generation and the older generation in terms of the knowledge that in the schools are really teaching, because things are always changing, especially also in academia. The types of
Huge.
the necessities that you need to learn in terms of skills and knowledge. But that's a great way to really balance out and gain more knowledge. Is just like you had mentioned, reading more articles, staying up to date with things that are going on in the world, definitely. And yeah, with that being said, do you see any gaps within the technology industry in general?
Oh, let's see. I think one thing that I've certainly seen a lot of, and maybe this is, pointing when I came into computers, everything was a little bit more bare bones, but it seems within the last, probably 5 to 10 years, there's been a bit of an explosion in overly abstracting things, which on some levels are great, right? Our systems, modern systems, were able to do things at scale that are just unbelievable and would have been really infeasible or maybe even impossible to do previously. But I think the industry in general, there's been something lost that makes it less accessible to a lot of folks, because they focus on learning at that abstraction level. And don't really understand the underpinnings well enough to use that abstraction well. You see it all the time when there's a problem that happens at a layer a little bit lower than what they're operating at. And sometimes if they don't have that underpinning to really understand what's going on down there, they can just be completely lost and not really know where to go. I mean, this can be, something as simple as being able to take apart a file format and understand what's really going on in it and what errors are generated by some system upstream to be able to handle it, down to things like what's happening in the network stack or in the virtual machines that are running across a cluster. Understanding how those are built, because occasionally these errors are going to come up, and you got to be somebody on the team, hopefully everybody on the team, but at least somebody, has to be able to dive in and be able to solve those problems and debug them. I remember joking around in high school with my math teacher that, like, because she wouldn't let us use calculators, and she would say, well, there's got to be somebody who knows how to make the calculators. So that's what she was training us to do. And I look at similar things with software. I want the people I work with, and I want the industry as a whole to understand those lower levels and be able to operate there if need be, because that gives you a lot more benefit in the abstraction layers when you're operating at much higher levels. Lets you know the pieces where you can really push the gas or accelerate the machine in that direction.
Yeah, definitely. And I also wanted to dive into the type of knowledge that you would prefer your team to have. So I've talked to a lot of different guests on the podcast, and there's been a lot of mixed opinions in terms of wanting some team members to be experts within a specific field like data science or software engineering or business, while others are saying they would like their candidates to be more well-rounded for each person. For you, what is your opinion for that?
Yeah, I've definitely heard a lot of those discussions on the show, and happy to give my opinion along with the others. I tend to lean a lot more towards a generalist kind of role. I build cross-functional teams in general. That's the way I approach things. I can think about just in a handful of folks who are on my teams now. We've got people with backgrounds in computer science or MBAs, economists, and even a couple of classically trained musicians who are on the team. And I don't really know enough about music to know what they're pulling from that to make them be good engineers, but they're darn good engineers either way. And I think that all comes together really well. Even in the way that my teams work with others, we try to build cross-functional teams that are based around delivering outcomes. We have, engineers, data scientists, business analysts, product managers, and they're all working side by side with partners in sales and marketing to deliver outcomes. I think it really works well. I think not only do you get better business outcomes, you get some really great knowledge dispersal throughout an organization. So I think that works really well for business and organization building something. But aside from that, I think it's really good for the folks on those teams as well. The best engineers that I've ever worked with understood like a little something about design, and best product managers I worked with could get into the technical weeds, and maybe they weren't as good as the best engineer, but they could hold their own and understood the issues that were going on, all the way down to even the best data scientists, as I'm sure you know really well, Catherine. They understand the business domain that they're operating in, because that makes the difference between just kind of blindly applying models versus like really understanding what the outcomes they're trying to get at. And I think that makes a huge difference in the way work's done. And this approach, I think it really amazes people when you do it right. The small number of folks you can have on these teams that just generate huge value and all kinds of outcomes in the short term for the business, and then long term for themselves, because they've got a little bit broader domain knowledge.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the benefit of being a generalist on a team is that this person is able to converse with different people within the department and understand a little bit of everything and still get the end goal to get there. But yeah, I definitely agree. And I wanted to kind of just stray away from talking more about the technical stuff now and talk to you more about any hobbies or interests that you've been doing just to pass the time while everything's kind of remote right now. I see you have some guitars and some sports equipment in the back. Is that something you want to talk about?
Yeah, sure. I'll talk about it a little bit. I don't know how much I get to really pass the time. I have an 8-year-old son who takes up quite a lot of it. So spend a lot of time with him. But yeah, I coach his basketball teams and have for a few years. So that's been a lot of fun, and recently took up guitar. So I'm still terrible, but it was one of those things that I took up to consciously be bad at something and enjoy it along the way. And then and do a good bit of cycling when it's warmer, or at least try to. So really looking forward to the weather turning here over the next couple months and being able to get back out there on the bike.
Yeah, that's awesome. And guitar is, I think it's not easy to learn if it's maybe your first instrument that you're learning. I think it's supposed to be pretty hard.
Yeah, I don't have much to compare it to, but it seems that way so far. Just kind of picked it up on a whim a few months back last year. It wasn't exactly a COVID purchase, but just decided I don't have much musical talent, and I want my son to at least understand music a little bit. And since he's been doing homeschool because the schools here have been closed down for so long, I felt like digging a little bit deep into that, and maybe if I understand just a little bit of music, a little bit of rub off on him for the times that he can't get any of that at school.
Yeah, that's good. And that's a good balance to have is that musical background and also some of the sports and exercise kind of background. Definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
try to. If I if I gave him much time to do it, he'd play his Switch all day long, and
Yeah.
I can't blame him. I wanted to do the same thing when I was his age, so try to give it a little bit of balance here and there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I wanted to say thank you so much, Daniel, for being on the show today. Where can everybody find you online just to connect with you?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. I'm glad to be on the show. I regularly post on a few social networks like Twitter and LinkedIn, but my website's probably the best place to find me, and that's danielpeck.com.
Yeah, perfect. And to our audience, for more information on the data standard, you can find us at www.datastandard.io, as well as our YouTube and LinkedIn page. And this episode is sponsored by Pandio. They're innovating the tech space with their Apache Pulsar messaging system. So learn more about their work at pandio.com. Thanks so much, Daniel, for joining us. Such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.